Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the first official episode of The Rachel Lang Show, the one where I tell you what the show is about, who I am, and hopefully inspire you to keep listening, to like, subscribe, to share with all of your friends. In this episode, we are going to talk about the astrology of this week, which is a very, very big week, and we're going to lead up to the eclipse, which is happening on the 25th. And so there's a lot happening in our astrological story. Then we're going to back up and we're going to talk about why, Rachel? Why did you do this show? And what can you expect as you tune in each week? And finally, each episode of our show is going to have a call to action, the cosmic call to action. You might have heard in the trailer, which is the very first recording that you'll hear if you go to your favorite podcast streaming place and you click the Rachel Lang Show. You might have heard that this is more than just a podcast. The Rachel Lang Show is really a call to action. And, you know, my belief, my experience has taught me that the more you open up into your spiritual self and the more you access spiritual truth, the more you gain, you walk on that path of enlightenment, the more you feel compelled to dedicate yourself to making the world a better place for future generations, for people who are living here now. The more we feel compelled to take action. And so that cosmic call to action is where faith and spirituality and your path of enlightenment meets up with your real life lived experience. So every episode is going to have a call to action, a cosmic call to action. And I encourage you to visit therachelLangShow.com, where you can join our member-only community and share some of your cosmic call to actions, some of the inspiring things that you're doing and seeing and being out in the world. So first, let's talk about the astrology of this week. Before we get started with our interview, I wanted to give an overview of what's happening astrologically and some of the signatures that you're going to be feeling this week. I think the big overarching theme for this week happens on March 9th, and that is when Mars in Aquarius is in a standoff square aspect to Uranus in Taurus. Now, Mars is the planet of fire, it's passion, it's action. It's that motivating drive and that force that makes us want to get up and go. And Uranus is the planet of sudden change. It is the planet that can relate to impulsivity, where we've had a buildup of energy and it needs some kind of release. So this square brings us really face to face with situations in our lives that just are not working. And we can't sit back and just tolerate things that have been going on for too long. So we might see some sudden shakeups with this particular transit. The other thing that's happening, so the sun is activating both of these points. The sun is in a sextile aspect, which is pretty flowing. It means the energy is relatively open, even though you've got to kind of work a little bit with Uranus. And the sun is also in a semi-sextile, which means right next to, in the sign just adjacent to Mars. And so the sun's presence in this aspect relationship shows that we are really able to, we are moving in the direction of our goals. We want to be unstoppable. So this can be somewhat of a challenge, especially for our fixed signs. So if you're a Taurus, a Leo, a Scorpio, or an Aquarius, then you might feel this as sort of a buildup of stagnation that needs some kind of catharsis. And for our earth signs also, so earth signs, you tend to be more on the tangible, practical side of things. And so this can be challenging if you don't quite know the steps to take. And so this is one of those weeks where there's a There's a lot of energy, and there's a lot of like, you can hear the tone of my voice pretty much describes it. Like, we have to make a new path forward for any situation where we have come to a roadblock or we feel stuck. Now, this is all happening during the balsamic moon, so that very last phase of the lunation cycle, when already it's a time of endings. It's a time of cleaning out and making space for some kind of new beginning. And we're doing this spiritually because we're talking about the sign of Pisces. I think there's also going to be a big shift that's taking place in the film industry and in entertainment, and that's because Pisces rules the entertainment industry, and this is happening just the day before the Academy Awards, and the day of the Academy Awards is that new moon. So, on a really practical level, you might just need more time and space alone. You might need more of a break, more rest. The other thing that's happening on March 9th is that Mercury is entering Aries. And Mercury is the planet that relates to communication. It's how we express ourselves and what we're thinking about, too. So it can be related to our inner dialogue. And Aries is assertive. It wants to express itself. This particular placement gives us the courage to speak our mind, and to speak our mind, even when some of us, if you have any Libra in your chart, thank you, then you might be a little bit more reserved, or you might not want to offend people with what you say, or those of us who tend to censor ourselves. This is a time when that filter comes off, and we can really be more authentic about how we are expressing ourselves in the world. So we could see more politicians coming out, for example, really speaking out against things that they might have been quiet about in the past. I think, because Mercury is in Aries, we're going to see a lot of volatility, maybe more fights breaking out on social media. But there's always a movement forward. I think the energy of Aries is never about conflict just to rock the boat. I think that there's always this sense of of wanting, because it's a cardinal sign, wanting to move the conversation forward. And so that's what we're going to see. We're going to see that happen. Now, on March 11th, sweet Venus enters Pisces. And so it really adds a graceful tone. So the 9th, the 10th, there's like this buildup with these influences that are taking place. And then Venus reminds us of what it is to connect with one another, to relate, and to experience pleasure. Venus in Pisces gives us the sense that we can enjoy ourselves. So that influence really tempers some of that buildup of fire, or some of that buildup of cathartic energy. When the Pisces new moon, the Pisces new moon really brings us into eclipse season. We are really moving toward that March 25th eclipse. So everything starts intensifying throughout the month. And it's really important because intensity can mean that we are all really activated by others' anger, angry words, or others' angry actions. And so we really want to keep that in mind as we engage in any kind of conflict, or as we move through our day. It's not the time to yell at the grocery store checkout person, or it's not the time to start a fight with someone behind you in line. But it is a time to, if you've been wanting to say something and you've been holding back, if you're wanting to express your love for somebody and you've been like biting your tongue, now is the time to do it. You've got some extra courage, and Venus in Pisces really gives us the opportunity to speak with poetic words, to use language from our heart. And that can be a real turning point for us in our relationships or in other aspects of our lives. And now we are ready for our feature presentation. So, for those of you who don't know much about astrology, this is kind of like your energetic weather report. There's a saying that we astrologers have, as above, so below. And very often we can identify what's taking place in our lived experience, in current events, in pop culture, in our personal lives. And there's an astrological correspondence. So when we understand what's happening with the astrology of these times, then we can better make sense of what's happening in our own lives. So this is why we start every episode with that framework, so that we're not just looking at what's happening in the world, we're looking at why, and hopefully helping you navigate these really transformational times. So this week is a lead up to the eclipse on March 25th. So the first thing we have Mercury. We have a lot of Neptune happening this week. We have the Sun conjunct Neptune on the 17th, and for those who don't speak this language of astrology very fluently, let's just say that the Sun meets up with Neptune, and it's kind of like all of us are going through this period, this foggy couple of days where we are really in touch with our dreams and what's possible, and ideas of magic and magical thinking. But also Neptune can kind of cloud our sense of what's real. And so we move through this period, and this perfects on the 17th. And when I talk about something, an aspect perfecting, that means it's exact. And so this is when we feel it the most. But really, we feel any transits that are like this, when they're involving the Sun, we feel those for several days, and that kind of casts a haze over the whole week. So Sun conjunct Neptune can make us feel like what's real, what's not, and that happens on the 17th, on Sunday. And so that transit also, the Neptune. One couple of things about Neptune. Let me just stop and talk about Neptune for a second. So Neptune is a planet that's named after the god of water. And in mythology, Neptune wasn't too excited about being the god of water. And, he wasn't the god of the sky, he wasn't the god of the underworld. And he kind of felt like he got slighted a little bit if you read some of the stories. And so Neptune decided, oh, okay, if I'm going to be the god of the sea, then I am going to, kick up some waves. I'm going to create some turbulence. And so sometimes you have water that's really still and calm and smooth. And sometimes you have water that is a flood or that is a tidal wave. And so Neptune's influence can feel like that in our lives. It can feel like the dream, the slow trickle of energy. And, there's a lot of association between money and water and the element of water. So Neptune can feel like this flow of energy that we are tapped into or we are pushing against. Neptune astrologically relates to our dreams. It relates to mysticism, the deep spiritual well that we enter into when we are in doing any kind of psychic mediumship, when we are grieving or healing. Neptune is the planet that relates to our sense of being able to understand that we are attached to other realms and that we can experience other realms in addition to just the 3D world. So Neptune's influence is, it's the height of romance, and it's the bubble bursting when you realize that that person isn't calling you back and you thought they were the one. So when the Sun meets up with Neptune, this happens once every year, we see the potential for all of our dreams, and we see the dreams that haven't culminated or manifested into our lives or into a tangible form, and we feel the grief and the disappointment for that. This is a time of deep spirituality. It's not the time when we're the most logical. So this isn't a great time to do your taxes. Do your taxes before or do your taxes after. But honestly, do your taxes do them before, unless you're going to file an extension, do them before April 15th, because these next several weeks are intense. They're passionate. There's a lot happening. And it's going to probably be hard to sit still and get focused with so much energy coursing through us, around us, and through the people that we love. So the sun meets up with Neptune, and it sort of casts this sweet little glow over everything. And then on the 18th, right after that, now the 17th and 18th are days when you have divine messages coming in. So pay attention to any insights that come up in your awareness. Pay attention to any dreams. You might want to keep a dream journal those days. And also notice when someone comes up to you and they say something out of the blue, that might be a guiding message as well. So don't take anything at face value on those couple of days. Mercury meets up with the North Node on the 18th, and it really sparks some attention. The North Node is a destiny point, and it shows us what we are moving toward. And the transiting North Node shows us what in our culture we are here to prioritize, to pay attention to, and what we have to like the lessons that we have to learn as a collective whole. Mercury is in Aries. Aries is a fire sign. Aries is the sign that says, I want to assert myself. I want to speak my truth. And when Mercury meets up with the North Node, it's a time when all of us are keyed into intellectually into the what feels purposeful and what doesn't. And so it's a time when we can really identify what doesn't belong in our life and what it's time to let go. On the 19th, the sun enters Aries, and this is we are speeding up the timeline of 2024. Everything is going to start happening fast. All the planets are moving direct until April 1st when Mercury stations retrograde. And so we have this really interesting time when there's a buildup of energy, a buildup of Aries energy, which is fiery, can be impulsive, which is I want to get things done, and everything's going direct. So there's no resistance stopping us from taking a leap of faith, of saying, this is what I want, this is where I'm going. And rallying the energy and then bringing people along with you. So you could really pioneer a lot of change right here on the 19th. And we want to be mindful of the fact that when we are so close to an eclipse, that everyone's feeling this ripple effect of change in their lives. And we're also seeing that just in the world. And I think we're going to be seeing this especially as we start the beginning of April. I think some military events and ripple effects of the wars that are taking place right now. I think there's going to be a lot of volatility early in April. So March builds up the energy for what is the catharsis that comes in early April. And so we're headed into some really intense times. So that is something that we're going to feel the 19th. The 20th, Mercury meets up with Chiron. And Chiron is this little planetoid that relates to we call it the wounded healer. But really, Chiron shows us what we can learn from our suffering or from the suffering of others. And it's ultimately what drives us to be in service to one another and to ending suffering as a whole. Chiron has been a very active player in our astrological story this year. And it's evident in the fact that we're watching all of the suffering taking place in places that are experiencing war. And think about how many people have moved to get involved in peace building movements, to get involved in advocacy as a result of the suffering that we're seeing. This is Chiron's influence. Chiron says, I can't just sit back and watch as people suffer, or as animals suffer, or as the earth suffers, or we can't sit back. We have to take action. And Chiron and Aries in particular is, I don't want to just take action. I want to be purposeful in it. I want to make sure that I'm making a contribution, that my voice is being heard, and I'm going to fight if I need to. And so this is a prevailing energy that takes us into 2025. The North Node is in Aries until January of 2025, and we're going to feel Chiron's influence throughout that time. Chiron's in Aries right now. So Mercury, the messenger, allows us to go in and out of the underworld. That's what Mercury mythologically did. Mercury could go into the underworld, translate, communicate, and then come out on the other side and deliver messages. And that's really what we're doing with our own psyche, with our own awareness, is we're going into the depth of ourselves, of our souls, and we're asking what belongs, what doesn't, who am I? I know there are a lot of people who are asking those existential questions. And that's what we're supposed to be doing right now. This is one of those transitional and transformational years that sets us up for how we respond to the outer planet transits of 2025 and 2026. So right now we are being called into the deep waters of our own unexplored selves and the deep waters of the unexplored psyche, that is the collective psyche, the unconscious that we are a part of. And within that, we are dedicating ourselves to people that we love, to pathways forward. And on the 21st, Venus in Pisces, Venus is exalted in Pisces, and she meets up with Saturn. That is the defining point of commitment that tells us that what we love and who we love, that we need to work for those people, for those relationships, for those values, for those priorities. And it's also a time to develop to kind of like, we have to, Venus Saturn is not the most fun shopping transit. Let's put it that way. It's a time when we're pulling back. We're cutting back what doesn't belong. We're being very discerning with how we dedicate ourselves and to who we dedicate ourselves. And this is an influence that we feel especially on the 21st. Then on the 22nd, Mars enters Pisces. And Mars in Pisces is quite a soft Martian influence. But Mars is going to meet up with Saturn. And so Mars softens us, allows us to really fight for the rights of others. It brings out the humanitarian in us. And so we'll see a tone down in some of those cyber attacks that we saw when Mercury was in Aquarius, the sign of when Mars, was in Aquarius, the sign of technology. So we'll see a tone down of some of those types of activities. But we could see things with water, like we could see water submarine activity, or we could see tidal waves or things like that as Mars continues to move through this sign. So that takes us up to the lunar eclipse, which is a Libra lunar eclipse at 5 degrees Libra, and it happens at noon, 12 o'clock in the Pacific Daylight Time. And we will talk a lot about this lunation. We'll talk a lot about the Aries, the April eclipse. We're going to talk about that. We're going to spend a whole episode next time really dedicating ourselves to that eclipse cycle. And in fact, I will have a very special guest on to talk about eclipses, to talk about why eclipses are so significant, a little bit of the history of the eclipses, and then we'll go in depth into the March and April eclipses. So that is your astrological overview. And now we'll get into our main program. Okay, so welcome to our show. So I'm a little nervous. I'm not going to lie. Why am I starting a podcast? Let's start with that. So some of my friends and some of the people who know I'm doing this have, first of all, most of the reason why I'm doing this is because so many people, clients, students, friends, even just like, people I've been at conferences with, they're like, why don't you have a show? Why don't you have a podcast? We really need to hear your perspective. And so really you are what motivated me to do this. I tend to be a little bit shy. Probably can't tell, but I tend to be a little shy when it comes to being on camera, or to being heard. I have my Saturn placement can be a Saturn that likes to work behind the scenes. And okay, I'm going to get personal now. And at the beginning in November of last year, 2023, for those of you who are, in case you're listening to this at a different time, in November of last year, I was on a retreat, and November is a difficult month for me. I've had losses in November, and so November is always a deep time for me. And I went on this retreat, and I heard, in the stillness, out in nature, I heard that now is the time. We are moving through transformational times, and that's just putting it lightly. We're in a paradigm shift. There's a before and an after. And yes, this really started being activated in COVID in 2020, but that was just the beginning. That just catalyzed all the change. And we are going to continue to move in the direction of change over the next several years. And knowing what I know, it's going to be hard for many of us. And it's going to be amazing for all of us to witness this particular period in history. And what became clear to me when I was on this retreat is that we really have choices, that we could run ourselves into the ground and destroy ourselves and destroy the earth, and that we really have the power to do that. Or we could rally our collective magical powers, our collective visioning powers, our collective manifestation powers, and we could set a new course for humanity and for the earth. And so I became committed to doing that. I have an experience in magic. I work with magic. I've taught manifestation. I work with all of these principles. And so I know how powerful they can be. And what would happen if we all worked together to vision a new earth, to usher ourselves into a new paradigm? And the thought of that really excited me. It motivated me. It pushed me into courage beyond all the fears that I have of saying the wrong thing or looking bad on video, and all those little silly fears that come up anytime I'm getting ready to do something like a podcast. And so that's what this show is really about. When I think about this show and I think about the core message of this show, it can best be summarized by Glinda the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz. At the end of the movie, Glinda tells Dorothy, "You had the power all along, my dear." We really have the power to change and shape the future. It was in, I think, 2013 or 2014, I don't remember when I first went to Sister Giant, which is, Marianne Williamson started this movement to merge spirituality and those of us who are spiritual in a non Christian way, I should say. So those of us who have more of that New Age spirituality, or who are more esoteric in our spiritual practices, and politics. And I've always been under the oppression of, I've always connected faith, and my spirituality is rooted in service and rooted in getting involved and participating in the political conversations. And so it was Sister Giant that I connected with others who were of a like mind. And ultimately, that path led me to being to wanting to be in service. And I ran for city council, and I grew up, and my grandfather was the first mayor of our small town, and he was such a model for me, and I looked up to him so much. And I saw how much everyone in our community growing up really looked up to him. And he did so much for so many people. And he was particularly committed to helping the poorest of the poor in our community. And I saw that leadership and I saw that model. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to be that. I want to create that for myself. And I always knew I would want to be involved politically, always from a time I was really young, or I wanted to be involved in service in some way. And so I decided in 2022 to run for city council. And here's where I should say that nothing that I say here in this podcast reflects my views of the city or my city council position. So I'll offer that disclaimer. And I knew that the election was taking place on an eclipse. And so I was like, I think I have a chance of winning this, of being a servant. And so I knocked on doors and I really got to connect with people and I got to experience, what democracy is like firsthand. And it was awesome. I'm using that word in the real sense. I was awestruck sometimes, striking up conversations with people, hearing what they had to say, and participating in the political process. And I discovered that it's all about relationships. It's the whole thing is about relationships and about caring for other people. And those are two things I do well. So yeah, so the election happened on November 8th and I was elected to serve and I'm humbled every single day that I get to do this work. And so we might feel that we have to separate our spirituality from other areas of our lives. Or especially if you do astrology or if you are into woo-woo, how many centuries have we been taught that that's not legitimate? And there's a long history of that I'll cover in a future episode. But really, we can't separate our spirituality from ourselves, and we can't separate our spirituality from our activism. They're motivated from the same source. And that source is our deep connection to our purpose, to our souls, knowing, and to these invisible threads of spiritual energy and spirit-led energy that connect us to one another and that connect us to this earth, to all created reality. We're going through a very precious time, and we need more spiritual leaders, and we need more curious individuals opening up and awakening to their spiritual selves. It is the only way we are going to save this planet, or to actually save ourselves. The planet's fine, but it's the only way that we're going to come together for real solutions. And so this podcast, you're going to hear the whole spectrum. I call it the Rachel Lang Show because it's a little bit pop culture, it's a little bit, activism, it's a little bit politics and current events, it's a little bit astrology. And that's really, that's me. I'm an artist. I'm a servant, a public servant. I am an astrologer, professional astrologer for almost 20 years. And I have this sense being able to connect all three of those things that I think is something that a lot of us are all tapped into and waking up to at this time. So this show is for you. We are going to have some incredible guests. You all should hear my lineup. It is going to be so good. You are just going to have a great time listening to some of my guests. And because this is the first episode, I'm aware that you might have questions, that you might have topics that you want me to cover. And so please send me any kind of details you have or any kind of questions you have. Let's hear what you have to say. This is your show, your sanctuary. This is a place where you come and feel seen and heard because I do see and hear you. I see and hear you when you're in my client sessions. I see and hear you when you're in my DMs. I see and hear you when you're in my public comments. And my intention in being here with you is that listening to this show, you feel more powerful to affect change in your life and in the world. that you know that you're not just a bystander in this world, that you are an active creator, an active participant. And I'm going to give you the tools you need to become more involved and to shape your life. Speaking of which, your cosmic call to action. Are you ready for it? Okay, here we go. Take a deep breath. Let that tension out of your body. Your cosmic call to action is to connect with one other person this week and tell them about the show. Somebody you think might resonate with this information, might want to join our community, just someone who you think could be inspired by anything I have to say. You can tell more than one, but just at least one. Just tell one person and then, see what happens. The great thing about cosmic call to actions is they have a ripple effect. And so see what ripples back to you, what ripples out through your life. Thank you for joining us on our first episode of The Rachel Lang Show. We'll be back same time, same place next week.